Commissioner Theberge, Mr. Floch, ladies and gentlemen, there are over 250 people registered for the forum, I'm pleased to say. Hello, I'm Lorraine O'Donnell, Research Associate with the Quebec English-Speaking Communities Research Network, QUESCREN, and Chair of the Forum Program Committee. My happy role is to welcome you to the forum and express acknowledgements. So, on behalf of Concordia University, welcome to QUESCREN's Education and Vitality Forum. I'll begin by stating that Concordia is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ghanaian-Gahaga Nation is recognized as the custodian of the lands and waters on which we gather virtually today. Jojoge, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous peoples within the Montreal community. In that vein, my thanks to the members of First Nations communities who generously agreed to share knowledge of Indigenous education at this forum. Respectful connection between communities is a central theme of the forum, which explores how Quebec's English language education system contributes to community vitality. English-speaking Quebec faces vitality challenges identified in our 2018 forum, including underemployment and youth outmigration. Since then, renewed social focus on Black and Indigenous populations, new language laws, and the COVID pandemic, among other situations, have deepened collective understanding of challenges in education. This came out at our 2019 Forum for Youth Insights, and it is clear from this year's forum program. We can think of a spectrum with vulnerability on one end and vitality on the other. How can education reduce vulnerability and promote vitality despite vulnerabilities within Quebec's English language education system itself? How can we build on a record of important innovations, including French immersion and community learning centers? QUESCREN created the Interlevel Educational Table, ILET, to address such issues. ILET has delegates from Quebec's English language education institutions and other stakeholders. It promotes vitality through educational activities like this forum. An ILET subcommittee planned the forum and developed its rich and varied content. So just to let you know, we first planned it to be in person in 2020 and then in 2021. Then we moved to thinking of a hybrid event. And finally, we decided to make it entirely online. It was a tough decision, but the right one given the ongoing pandemic. The online forum allows for broad access. Attendees can drop in from anywhere and for just an hour or the full 3 days. So ILET has 32 members, and I'm happy to say a full half of them are on the forum program committee. And my sincere thanks to all committee members whose names are on the online conference program. And I think Lena's going to drop them in the chat as well. Thank you so much for sticking through thick and thin. And likewise, thanks to forum staff Anna Hunt, Anna Gomez, Patrick Donovan, Aurelia Roman, Antonia Macris, Patrick Donovan, and above all, Lena Shumarova for your competence and good humor. Thanks to Concordia's hospitality and IT staff for support. QUESCREN acknowledges our forum financial partners. They are the Government of Quebec through the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, Canadian Heritage, and Concordia University. Finally, thanks to participants. The forum is an opportunity to share our knowledge. If you can, plan to attend several forum activities. Check out the Agora, a space for conversations and networking using the Wonder platform, and please attend the wrap-up town hall Friday at 4, where you can express what you found interesting and some key takeaways. So with that, I will call on Mr. William Floch, Secrétaire Adjoint of the Secretariat, to give opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to welcome the presenters and participants to what I'm sure will be a stimulating and enlightening 3 days. QUESCREN has brought together an impressive set of presenters and attracted more than 250 attendees to this 3-day event. So bravo. A number of members of my team from the Secrétariat Relations avec le Québec d'expression anglaise will be attending the sessions. For us, as well as representatives from other departments in the Gouvernement de Québec, as well as other levels of government, the forum represents a unique opportunity to listen and learn about Quebec's English-speaking communities and their preoccupations. I'd like to make a few comments about the role of research and the work of the interlevel education table in bringing together researchers, stakeholders, and decision makers. Just as a contextual comment, in my former role as research manager in the official languages branch at the Department of Canadian Heritage, I had the privilege of developing a joint funding program to support research in official languages. This was done with the former Social Science Humanities Research Council. The program ran from 2003 to 2007, and we thought it was a great success. It enabled researchers to study key themes in the area of official languages, such as minority language education, second language learning, and community vitality for minority communities. And while we were generally pleased with the results of the projects submitted under the program and their successful delivery, we were surprised, even shocked by the lack of uptake by Quebec-based institutions. In fact, English-speaking Quebec was noticeably absent as a topic for research under that program. Despite millions of dollars being spent, there were essentially no projects that targeted English-speaking Quebec as an entity worthy of study. Flowing from that, it became clear there was a gap and there was a need for a research body like QUESCREN. At the time, we worked with the Canadian Institute for Research on Minority Communities at the University of Moncton to start the ball rolling to what eventually became QUESCREN. And I would say that the University of Moncton has been an ongoing supporter of QUESCREN. I believe there's some of the researchers from that team that are also participating in this forum. But of course, we would also really underline the active interest and ongoing support from Concordia University. QUESCREN is meant to be, and it is, an inter-institutional entity. But of course, the growing commitment of Concordia to support QUESCREN and its activities obviously is a major contributor to its success. In my current role as Secretary Adjoint of the Secretariat, I've very much appreciated solid partnership that we've been able to build with QUESCREN and Lorraine O'Donnell in particular. But the current co-chairs, Brian Lewis and Shelley Bakova, have been available, supportive, and intimately engaged with the various research and knowledge mobilization projects of QUESCREN. We can see from the forum program that researchers from many universities, including all 3 English language universities in Quebec, will be sharing the results of their research. I also find noteworthy the interest of scholars from French language universities, as well as universities outside Quebec. It's worthy noting that. I think one of the things that QUESCREN has been able to do and will be an ongoing priority for it is to sort of break the silo between education and community practitioners and researchers so that we can better understand the role of education and community vitality. That's clearly one of the major themes of this conference. And certainly we'll be looking to learn about those challenges. So in closing, I'd like to congratulate QUESCREN and ILET for their excellent work in developing such a stimulating program. And I look forward, along with my colleagues, to hearing the results of the work of the dedicated researchers who'll be sharing their results and their perspectives over the next few days. So to the participants, I encourage you to engage with each other and with the presenters so that we can all maximize our benefits from the forum. Back to you, Lorraine.
Thanks, Mr. Floch. I'm now pleased to hand the floor to Dr. Brian Lewis, professor in Concordia University's Department of Communication Studies and co-director of QUESCREN.
So good afternoon. Welcome to our first keynote address, which opens this year's QUESCREN's Education and Vitality Forum. This forum is a biannual event, it turns out to be, of the Interlevel Educational Table, ILET, which is a committee of Concordia University's Quebec English-speaking Community Research Network, or QUESCREN. My name is Brian Lewis. I'm professor of communication studies at Concordia, and I'm co-director of QUESCREN. I'll be your moderator for this session. The keynote will be about 30 minutes long, and there'll be about 15 minutes for questions and answers. Our keynote speaker today is Angelica Galante. Angelica is assistant professor in language education and TESOL at McGill University in Canada, Montreal. Her research focuses on social factors that impact language learning, innovative language pedagogy, and the effects of plurilingual and translingual approaches in student learning. She's the recipient of the 2019 Pat Clifford Award, awarded by the EdCan Network for Excellence in Educational Research. At McGill, Dr. Galante is director of the Plurilingual Lab, where she and her team mobilize research and teaching resources. She's published in journals such as Applied Linguistics, International Journal of Multilingualism, and TESOL Quarterly. Her keynote topic is the importance of a plurilingual approach in English-speaking higher education for language vitality and identity validation. Dr. Galante, the floor, or should I say the screen, is now yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to share my screen. And, well, thank you so much. Eu vou me apresentar um pouquinho em português, porque essa é a minha língua materna. O meu nome é Angelica Galante, eu sou professora aqui no Departamento de Integrated Studies and Education na McGill University e também sou diretora do Plurilingual Lab. A minha talk today is going to be on the importance of a plurilingual approach in English-speaking higher education for language vitality and identity validation. I would like to actually say that the plurilingual approach is valid for not only English-speaking higher education, but because my research is in this area, I'm going to be focusing on that. I'd like to acknowledge once again Tiohtià:ke, which is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. And I would encourage you to acknowledge the lands where you are today. I know not everybody is in Tiohtià:ke, as the lands of the custodians of Indigenous peoples. I'll start talking a little bit about my positionality. I am in the field of applied linguistics and language education, so you see that most of my work has to do with teaching people how to learn languages or how to teach languages. A little bit about myself. Eu sou brasileira, sou latina. I have Spanish and Italian heritage. I am a settler in Canada. I'm also a former international student in higher education here in Canada, so I went through some of the struggles that international students go through with their language repertoires. I'm also a first-generation immigrant in Canada, in Ontario first, and now in Quebec. And I am a language teacher educator, so I prepare teachers on how to teach languages in Quebec and Canada and elsewhere. Some of the languages in my repertoire, I am listing them here just so you know about the complexity of languages that we all have, and I'm sure that each one of you will have your own repertoire in a unique way. So some of the things I'm going to be discussing today is the idea of Canada as a multilingual landscape and not bilingual, the need to rethink the concept of language, the plurilingual, multilingual turn in language education research. Then I'll delve into two studies that I have conducted in English-speaking higher education, one about language and identity and another one about language pedagogy, and some recommendations, and I would look forward to engaging in some conversations with you in the end. So one of the things that I have, when I first encountered when I came to Canada was the boxes that we are usually using to place language speakers. We have Anglophone, Francophone, Allophone, and when I was placed into the Allophone category when I arrived here, that did not really represent who I was. So I understand that this is something that we use in policy, but sometimes it's important to see how policies are affecting the way people may see themselves as plurilingual speakers or not. Some of the things about Canada, I'm sure we are going to see this throughout the events here, that of course we have the 2 official languages in the country, with Quebec having French, but there are about 200 other languages here that are important to be recognized. We have seen that according to Statistics Canada, that multilingualism is on the rise. We have a rise in international students as well. Which I'm focusing on international students because it's a population that I usually work with. And with the internationalization, at least inbound, we will see the languages and cultures that are being brought to the landscapes as well, which help diversify the place. Montreal is the city in North America with the highest number of trilinguals, and Montreal itself has over 100 languages. So again, it's important to recognize that. Now, English-speaking higher education institution policies typically reflect a monolingual disposition. There are policies in English, there are policies in French. These are the 2 languages, at least in Montreal. In English-speaking higher education in Montreal, that students are allowed to, for example, submit their assignments. But of course, there are other languages that are in the landscape that are left underexplored and pretty much ignored. Now, in language education, there has been a shift from monolingual to bilingual, from monolingual and bilingual education to plurilingual education in recent years. Of course, not everybody is on board with a plurilingual education, but we have seen several researchers saying the benefits of this type of education in language education. And I'm going to show you a little bit of what I have found. We have seen several books in the past 10 or 20 years on plurilingual education. So of course, you will see that this is not an English-speaking environment. It has been published in several languages. Of course, there is a long tradition of plurilingualism in the French language as well. So I would encourage you to read a little bit more in case you're interested. Now, plurilingualism is, as a social dimension, is not something new. Societies have used different languages to communicate. We see this in Montreal as well. But plurilingualism is not only a theoretical framework, but it's also a pedagogical framework. So in terms of pedagogy, how to teach languages using the languages that students already have in their repertoire is something that has been seen as very beneficial. And when we think about the repertoire, we are really thinking about several components, not only language as separate dimensions, for example, English and French, but other types of aspects as well. For example, identities, plural identities are not only one, languages, semiotic resources, multimodality, language varieties, and cultures as well. So something that I'd like you to think about is not necessarily the languages as separate dimensions, but languages as integrated into the repertoire. And it's in this integration and this interdependence that is what I'm going to be addressing today. Now, plurilingualism is a concept that has been theorized by the Council of Europe. I included here some of the most important tenets. So for example, a plurilingual person is a person who has the ability to call flexibly upon the interrelated repertoire that they have. So for example, they feel comfortable to switch from one language to another whenever it's necessary, express oneself in one language or another, or variety. The knowledge that they have gained in these languages as well. So sometimes I can gain knowledge, I can read a text in one language and express the same knowledge in another language, recognizing different words, learning words in different languages, being open to learn more about other languages and other cultures, and exploit other types of resources, for example, gestures, facial expressions, etc. So as you can see, it's much more than language that comes into the question. The CEFR, which is the Common European Framework of Reference companion volume, has some descriptors for language teaching. I included some of them here just so you understand that when we are teaching a language, we're not really teaching students to use the language like a native speaker, because this is an idea that has been debunked, that nobody needs to speak the language like a native speaker, but they are able to use the language to do a variety of things. So for example, to interact in a multilingual context, to use the languages flexibly, to describe different viewpoints from different cultural communities, to mediate communication naturally, and also use the knowledge that they gather in different languages and think critically about these knowledges. Now I'll share with you two studies in higher education, one in an English-speaking university in Montreal and another one in an English-speaking university in Toronto. And I'll check my timing here so that I don't get lost. So study number one, it was done here in an English-speaking university in Montreal and also in our lab. So there was a call for participants. We had 250 participants from different programs, applied linguistics, political science, etc. The criteria was that they were 18 years of age and they would speak 2 or more languages. The recruitment was done basically me and my research assistant, John Wendell Cruz, who's also an author of the study. We would go to language classrooms, sorry, not only language classrooms, to different classrooms, undergraduate and graduate courses, to ask for participation. And it wasn't surprising at all that every time that we would go to a classroom, 100% of the students would be willing to participate. So that means that they all spoke 2 or more languages. We use 3 instruments to collect the data: a demographic questionnaire, the Plurilingual Pluricultural Identity Questionnaire, and a Plurilingual and Pluricultural Competence Scale, which I'm going to show in a bit. A demographic questionnaire had questions about what are your languages? Tell me your first language, your second. Many times people would use 2 languages as their first. Other languages that they had in their repertoire, a little bit about themselves in terms of race, etc. The PPIQ questionnaire asked them if they would identify as a plurilingual person or as a pluricultural person. So we provided a definition of a plurilingual person being someone who knows 2 or more languages, even if they don't feel that they speak them at a very high proficiency level. So you don't have to be the perfect bilingual or plurilingual, multilingual that we may call. You can have those languages at a different level of proficiency. A pluricultural person is someone who knows about 2 or more cultures, and they are able to communicate within these cultures as well. The PPC scale is a scale that I developed. It has 22 items with sentences that people would agree or disagree. And I'll show a couple of sentences here. For example, when talking to someone who knows the same languages as I do, I feel comfortable switching between one language to another. So if you agree, completely agree, you would use a 4. And in terms of culture as well. So the PPC scale has both language and culture together. A little bit about the results. So out of the 250 people, 92, almost 93% of the population, that particular sample, identified themselves as being plurilingual, and 88% define themselves as having a pluricultural identity. And of course, they had the choice of saying why they think that is. So I gathered a lot of data in terms of why they believe they are plurilingual and pluricultural, and of course I compiled them all. So I'll show a little bit about what they say a little bit later. So just as an interesting data here about the sample, there were 34 different first languages. So you can see the languages listed here. Chinese was at the same level as English, probably because of the number of international students in the classes that we visited. French, Arabic, Spanish, Greek, Persian, Italian, and some more. 100% of the sample was trilingual, which kind of combines with the first topic that I talked about, Canada being multilingual and Montreal being trilingual. 38% was born in Canada, 25% in China, and 35% was born in 39 other countries. Participants, most of them were white, Asian, then we have Middle Eastern, mixed ethnicities, Latinx, and Black. The main reasons that they gave us in terms of why they believe they are plurilingual, the first one, because of their rich linguistic repertoire. As you have seen from the sample, they all had at least 3 languages in their repertoire, and they would use these languages, maybe not every day, but they had those languages in themselves, and they would use them whenever they felt necessary. They had ample lived experiences. They were very aware of differences and similarities across languages. Transculturalism and moving from one cultural community to another, adapting as well, not only the language, but the way to communicate in one community and another, and translanguaging, using their languages flexibly and being very open to learn more languages. So I'll just highlight a couple of examples here. This person says that she was born in Montreal, and as a child of immigrants, they attended Greek school. They studied English, Greek in elementary school, then English and French during high school, then studied English and Spanish. So as you can see, even in the landscape here in Montreal, the person, this particular person had moved from one language institution to another institution. So of course this would we would see this in their plurilingual identity in the end. And she finishes this by saying, being plurilingual is who I am, and I cannot imagine myself working only using one language. Another person believes that they are all plurilingual because everybody knows at least 2 or variations of the same languages. Another one says that they speak Arabic because they are Moroccan, speak French as a second language, and also speak other languages as well, in Spanish, in school, and English. Of course, they were attending an English-speaking higher education institution, so they were interested in improving their language skills in English. The last one here is very interesting because the person was talking about how they feel when they speak different languages. So they said that I feel like a different person when I speak different languages. They feel very empowered, for example, when speaking English because they are exposed to different languages. At home, they have a kind of a hybrid culture where they trans language all the time between English and Arabic, for example. Now, participants who identified as bilingual, despite reporting having more than 2 languages, so even though people had more than 2 languages, they still felt that they were bilingual. These people were all born in Quebec. And of course, I am hypothesizing here that it could be because of the political and the policies that we have both in Canada and in Quebec, the idea of if you speak 2 languages very well, you are considered bilingual. So even though they may use more languages, they may still not feel that they are plurilingual because of proficiency levels in those languages. There was a positive correlation between PPC levels and number of languages. So this indicates that the higher number of languages reported was related to a higher PPC scores. Now, these results have implication to language vitality and validation of identity in higher education. So this led me to think about how we can envision sustainability of languages, and not necessarily in English here, but all languages that someone has in their repertoire. So I would like to share the second study, which has to do with language pedagogy. So this was also done in an English-speaking university, but in Toronto. It was done in an EAP program, which is an English for Academic Purposes program. So it is a program teaching languages. There were 129 international student participants, and this was a quasi-experimental mixed method study, and I'll explain a little bit about what I did. So there were 7 instructors, and each instructor taught 2 different groups of students. They were intact groups. One was a comparison group where they would use a monolingual approach, and one was a treatment group in which this was going to be a plurilingual approach. So in both, they were teaching English for academic purposes, but using different approaches. There were 50 students in the comparison group and 79 students in the treatment group. Now, the approach had to do with weekly tasks. And I'm not going to talk much about the tasks, but they are available in this website called Breaking the Invisible Wall. If you'd like, you can take a look at it. But the plurilingual tasks had to do with taking a look at languages in the linguistic landscape, thinking about plurilingual identity, translanguaging as a strategy to learn new languages, taking a look at local and global communities in terms of languages and cultures, identifying idioms, for example, used in academia in different languages and how they can be expressed in different ways. Intercultural communication, when we are communicating with different cultural communities, even within academia, when you will have to share knowledge in different disciplines, for example. Now, we used 7 instruments to collect data, but I'm going to focus only on 4 here today. And one is students' diaries. So we asked students to provide their input on what they were thinking, what they thought about the plurilingual tasks that they were receiving. Interviews with the teachers at the very end of the experiment, asking them which tasks, the monolingual or the plurilingual tasks, did you find most helpful and why? And finally, a vocabulary test focusing on vocabulary that both groups had learned, but using different approaches. And the vocabulary test had to do with academic terms. So the first finding, plurilingual instruction had a positive effect on students' plurilingual and pluricultural competence over time, and this was used with the PPC scale. So you see that at time 1, when students first started their program, they had similar levels of plurilingual pluricultural competence, but by the end of the program, 4 months later, they had a significant increase among the students in the treatment group, the ones who received plurilingual education. Finding number 2, plurilingual instruction can have positive effects on EAP students' academic vocabulary development as well. So again, the students in the treatment group had a better vocabulary score at time 2 compared to the students who received monolingual instruction. Finding number 3, plurilingual instruction has several affordances that monolingual instruction may not have. And this finding came from the student's diary. So just highlighting some of the things that the students talked about. So moving from one language to another and making comparisons between languages, for example, of course, added cognition. So this was something that it was the first thing that they mentioned. Plurilingual, pluricultural awareness, flexibility within the languages, additional language and culture. So many students were learning not only English, but also the languages, the languages of their peers. They were more aware of societal multilingualism and multiculturalism. So many of them, because they were living in Canada, and they were international students, they were not aware of Canadian multiculturalism until they started talking about it and doing linguistic landscaping. A lot of empathy, English language learning, relatability, because they were all plurilingual students, so they all had a shared knowledge in terms of languages. It aided in critical thinking. Many students talked about looking at the same topic in different languages and different sources and how they may be portrayed differently. That helped them kind of validate which source may be more or less reliable. And a willingness to learn additional languages. They talked about 2 challenges, but they were mainly related to challenges that we often have because languages are different. So how to translate one term to another, and sometimes how to talk to someone who speaks only one language and may not be open to even hearing other languages. So they have to feel to kind of adopt a monolingual posture when communicating with these people. Just to share one quote from a student who said that in Canadian culture, people are used to using transition words during conversations, for example, to make ideological, but in China or in Chinese, transition words are not as much used as in Canadian culture, probably in terms of English. And going through this process of comparing languages and how language is used in academic settings was something very helpful for them to analyze. Okay, so now if I'm writing in English, I may be using more transition words than if I am writing in Chinese, for example. And finally, finding number 4, all 7 instructors showed preference to plurilingual instruction in comparison to monolingual instruction, but they did admit that one challenge was monolingual policies in higher education. So even though they may encourage that students draw from their linguistic repertoires, tests, for example, even language tests, they tend to be very monolingual, and the standards are very monolingual. So for them, this was something that it didn't make much sense in terms of the policies. Of course, if they could change the policies, they said that they would prefer to have something more plurilingual in the end. Now, to conclude this talk, I would like to ask everybody here to think about how languages and identities are inextricably linked, and how we can think about a plurilingual approach or a plurilingual education so that people feel comfortable with their linguistic repertoire, continue to use their languages, and continue to learn more languages. And draw your attention of monolingual or bilingual discourse that can pose barriers to language vitality and identity validation, which we have seen so much, not only in Canada, but in other countries, especially with immigration, by the second or third generation, some people may have already lost the language of the immigrants when they came. Some recommendations, of course, institutional policies in diverse contexts need to recognize the current multilingual, multicultural reality. And one of my jobs and in my area is to prepare teachers to think about this new reality in their classrooms, and also encourage them to empower their students to continue using their languages and learning their languages, so that we can kind of challenge this monolingual disposition that can be enacted in higher education and other educational systems as well. And I will conclude here. So thank you very much. Niawen, muchas gracias, muito obrigada. And I will be open for questions.
Allow me to thank you very much, Angelica, on behalf of all the participants who are largely muted at this point. Bill Floch would like to talk about the World Series.
No, it's not that I want to talk about the World Series per se, but as it happens, the general manager of the winning team in last night's World Series final is a proud Montrealer who has a trilingual background. There's an interview, I gave the link from Roger Bourrelat, where he talks about his Greek and English and French linguistic heritage. So I thought it was kind of apropos of Dr. Galante's talk to celebrate, I guess, an example of what she's speaking about. That's all I had to say.
Great, thank you.
From Cindy Finn, would you like to ask your question? Or I can ask it for you. Is there a difference between the word multilingual versus plurilingual? The latter term is a new one for me.
Thank you, Cindy. That's a question that we people who work with plurilingualism get all the time. Many scholars use the term plurilingual and multilingual as interchangeably without any difference. But depending on the, the scholarship, you will see that they may have differences. So one of the definitions that I use is from the Council of Europe that clearly defines the difference between multilingualism as the languages existent in a particular society, but not necessarily being interrelated. So we can have, let's say, 150 languages in Montreal, but not all these people are communicating in 150 languages. Now, plurilingualism has to do, using the same definition, plurilingualism has to do with the languages that the individual has in their own repertoire and how they use their languages. So multilingual education and plurilingual education, again, may mean the same thing depending on the scholar, but we can see that some multilingual educators are thinking about teaching different languages as languages compartmentalized. So French in one day, English in another day, and Spanish in another day. So it's still multilingual education, but they're not integrated. Now, plurilingual education are using all these 3 languages or more in an integrated way. So that would be the difference. But again, this is a difference that I use, and not every scholar uses that. I hope that clarifies your question.
This is from Lorraine O'Donnell. Angelica, is there a danger or issue of a hierarchy being created with plurilinguals having access to more opportunities and monolinguals, for example, people who do not have access to multilingual education, at the bottom? Are there economic opportunities by number of languages, for example?
Well, yes, there may be more opportunities for the number of languages. That's something we can see. But again, it depends on the language, right? We know that in Canada, if you are a bilingual English and French speaker, you may have way more access to some opportunities than other people. But I am a bilingual in Portuguese and English, and I never use my Portuguese here in this landscape. It's not as valid as other languages. So that's something that, yes, there is a risk of hierarchy in the power of languages. But the first question, is there a danger of issue being created with plurilinguals having access to more opportunities in terms of the education? I'm not sure. The idea is that monolinguals, not in plurilingual tradition, we don't believe there is such a thing as a monolingual. A monolingual is also a potential plurilingual, or a person who can at least have variations of the same language. Even if they speak only one language, they can still communicate differently in different communities using that same language. So I think it would be more an opportunity for monolinguals to think of themselves as plurilinguals and potential plurilinguals, and being open to learn more languages. And once again, learning a language doesn't mean learning to be a speaker, a native speaker of that particular language. It could be learning a few words in one particular language, or going to Chinatown, and instead of saying hi or bonjour, you can say ni hao to someone. So it's being very open for that.
I have a question myself. I want to thank you very much for this really fascinating research into the status of plurilingual education, but also the benefits or the effects. You describe Montreal as the most plurilingual city in North America. Have you developed data on the status of plurilingualism outside of the greater Montreal area? And are you beginning to explore the importance of those differences between Montreal and perhaps other regions of Quebec?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you for that. Yeah, Montreal is not the most plurilingual, but the trilingual, right? This is from Statistics Canada, not necessarily my own data. But definitely Montreal is a wonderful hub to conduct research on plurilingualism, especially because of the many languages that we have here. There is research in plurilingual education in Quebec, of course, in French language schools, for example. There is a lot of potential. It's not only in English, but of course, I'm not going to speak much about that because that's not the research that I do, but there are several other scholars who do that, not only in Montreal, but in Quebec.
Thank you. This is from Susan Regan at John Abbott College. How would the study of non-contemporary languages, for example, ancient Greek, Latin, correspond to plurilingual teaching?
I'm not sure if they correspond to, but let's say if you do have an interest in non-contemporary languages, ancient Greek, Latin, and these languages are part of your plurilingual repertoire, of course you can access texts. And when I say texts, not only written, it could be oral, it could be in other forms as well, other modalities. You can still access texts in these languages. So it doesn't affect negatively, or I would only say that it affects positively if this is something that you have in your repertoire and you're interested in. It's interesting that you asked this question, and I draw some parallel to many participants that I have who talk about their interest in Korean language because of Korean drama. Or of course, it's not really related to non-contemporary languages, but it has to do with the interest. So many students who never thought about studying Korean, they start learning Korean because they want to gain access to Korean language when they watch dramas on TV, or they are fans of K-pop, Korean pop. So that's excellent. So each person will have their own interests, and they can look for the language that may gain they may gain more access in that particular area.
So this is from Deb. Is there reason for genuine concern regarding language loss if a given context does not promote or facilitate the ongoing use of multi-languages? Is loss of mother tongue or second language a reality, one or both?
I wouldn't say there would be, not with plurilingual education. That's exactly the opposite. So the idea is, if we don't promote a plurilingual approach or a plurilingual education, then we might have language loss. And one simple example that I provided is the languages of immigrants when they arrive in one particular setting. And if it's a very one language only policy, of course, they start devaluing their own languages, right? When they arrived in this particular context. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to say a few words in Portuguese in the very beginning, because I really want to assert myself as a Portuguese speaker and never forget about that, because that's my first language, not to mention other languages that I have in my repertoire. So whenever I do have the opportunity to use those languages, yes, we should, because otherwise we're gonna lose. I don't like to use the word lose, but they can be dormant a little bit in your in your repertoire, and we may have to reignite them at some other time. But if there are no opportunities to reignite them, then they are forgotten.
We have time for a couple more questions. There's Dorothée Michaud, and then Natalina, I will call on you. You raised your hand. And then we'll end with a remark and sort of a question by Bill Floch. So Dorothée Michaud asks, how do the conditions of linguistic identity construction by plurilingual influence the development of a bi-pluricultural identity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say, first, the conditions of linguistic identity, it might, I don't know if it's the linguistic identity that we have that will influence the development, because here you're talking about identity. Let's talk about identity and language. So it could be that many people who speak 2 or 3 or 4 languages may still not identify as plurilingual, because they may have a different definition of what a plurilingual is. The idea of language speaker that we have usually is that a speaker is only a legitimate speaker if they are the native, if they speak that language as a native language. And if you don't speak that language as a native language, then you have to try to speak that language as a native language to become a legitimate speaker of that particular language. So what plurilingual education really does is to deconstruct this. I am using English here. English is by far not my first language. So if I were in a community that believed that I have to use English like a native speaker, and like a native speaker of which community again, then I would not claim English as part of my repertoire. I wouldn't feel comfortable even saying, oh, English is not even a language that I am competent in. So it's really deconstructing what we think of language that will allow you to embrace a plurilingual identity or not. And that's why I think many of the participants from Quebec still identify themselves as bilingual in English and French, even if they spoke other languages, because we have this notion that being bilingual, first, is only a person who speaks English and French. Second, is a person who speaks English and French very well.
Thank you. Thank you. Natalina, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you, Professor Lewis. I was just using my digital applause for Dr. Galante when she acknowledged her native language, Portuguese, being a daughter of now deceased Italian immigrant parents. So I was just using my digital applause, but thank you for calling upon me.
Thank you very much. Before we get to the final remark by William Floch, Gala Wilkie has another remark that she'd like to make. Thank you for your talk, Dr. Galante. My mother always said, don't forget your French too, when I was in French immersion schooling. She felt I was too anglicized because my first language was English. It's an experience many of us share.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Bill, to go back finally to the 2006 census, would you like to make these comments?
Well, just to share, I think there was some speculation about the particular context of Montreal. And I recall doing an analysis that showed the level of trilingualism, English, French, and another language, was 12 times higher in Montreal than in the rest of Canada. And I'd be interested to know whether that persists. And I think, you know, a sort of a common sense theory would be that because you have such strong English speaking and French speaking populations, somehow that's an advantage and maybe just an acceptance of languages. Anyway, I think it'd be interesting just to know the contextual data and then try to see what we can draw from it. That's all.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Angelica Galante. This was really wonderful. So I hope you will all applaud with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It was great to be part of this. So, muito obrigada.
We really hope, so you, the participants, you found this opening session stimulating and thought-provoking as we have. And thank you for your support and interest in these issues, which are vital to the ongoing vitality of English-speaking communities of Quebec. If you're not familiar with QUESCREN, I urge you to take a look at our website, become affiliated researchers. So thank you very much. And I'm going to take the rather draconian action now of ending this meeting. Bye all. Thank you.
Bye.